As I've been making videos on this channel and begun my journey to get an autism or otherwise diagnosis, I have come to understand myself so much better through that lens. I'm understanding myself better in tandem with my recent learnings. I've discovered terminology that finally fits my lived experience, and therefore I now have a system of reasoning to apply, which I've always so desperately sought all of my life as to understand why I am the way I am. It's been extremely validating, if not at times overwhelming, but the funny thing is that now, with these new understandings, it's weird to look back and see how, like, even though I didn't have the words for it, I already was so distinctly describing my neurodivergent traits. Some of it's like uncannily textbook, which made it super easy as soon as I came across content about masking and sensory needs that there wasn't much hesitation on my part outside of worrying that I'm encroaching on a space that I don't belong. But I was like, nope, 100%. That's how I feel. That's how I've always described my experience. I just didn't know that counted. I thought I was just worse at being a human than everyone else and should feel ashamed and try harder, which in itself is a pretty autistic thing to feel. But the reason I'm making this video was to show how obvious it can be, and yet people still not know. It sounds ridiculous to me too. That's why the idea I was autistic or otherwise was always off the table. Like, what do you mean people can go their whole lives and not know? Why are so many of us becoming self-diagnosed and receiving late diagnosis as adults? And I've got excellent examples all over my channel already of myself and how that sort of denial works. Not even denial, like sometimes it's just a lack of understanding of neurodivergent traits. And I would like to offer you examples in these. I didn't think that I was autistic yet. That possibility was not yet on the table, even if through accumulation of expressing these things, making these videos, I was nearing the ability to accept the obvious applicability of such a diagnosis. I originally made this channel as a means to work through my thought processes and why I experienced things because I was honestly getting a bit fed up. I hit 30 and life wasn't lining up in the ways I always was led to believe that it would. It sounds stupid, but essentially, no matter how much effort I put in, I still wasn't magically becoming neurotypical. I wasn't getting over all of the things that are neurodivergent traits, which I hoped would just sort themselves out over time and exposure. So, I started trying to argue all of the ways that I think that holistic ideals were wrong for me and from my perspective. Because it was so hard to come to terms with that if what I've been striving for isn't actually an ideal for me, that I shouldn't have to feel so bad about my lacking. But again, I didn't have the terms or lens to know that's what I was doing. In these two videos, I talk about my relationship with food growing up. I was always considered a picky eater, and I adapted that label myself because it fit. Like, I agreed. I had been a picky eater in practice, but I no longer am, and so I wanted to rectify that discrepancy. How can a child who is such a picky eater become such an adventurously well-tasted adult? And the conclusion I ended up drawing wasn't that I was all that picky of an eater as a kid. I just elected to limit myself to food that I knew I could rely on to enjoy. As accommodating as my mother was to my dietary desires, she was not a very consistent cook. As much as broccoli is one of my favorite veggies, that doesn't mean that it can't be overcooked to the point that I struggle to eat it. And as I explained in the other video, bad food makes me genuinely sad, for a variety of reasons. The same would go for whenever I went over to a friend's house for meals. It was far too much of a risk for me to have a wide menu when I had no control over the actual quality of the food that I'd be given. Like if I told someone that I like pasta, but then they tried to serve me Alfredo instead of spaghetti, I couldn't eat it. I'd be upset by the experience of forcing myself to try to eat it, and upset that I'd offended people because I just don't like it. Like, how even though that's not really my fault, I am expected to stomach it anyway, and then the experience of that sucks. I've both let everyone down and suffered. So suffice to say, I was actively electing to own the title of picky eater because despite the judgment that imposed upon me, it was preferable to constantly being faced with food that I struggled to handle. Give me chicken nuggets and fries, and that's always okay. And when I grew up and explored other types of food only to realize that I like a lot more food than I could have ever imagined, I made this video as an explanation to how and why that label was pinned to me when it's so clearly not true. I wasn't a picky eater so much as I was actively trying to mitigate variables in how a food I usually do like is prepared, because if it is done wrong, then I don't want it at all, and I'd rather starve. And all this to say, looking back on this video and explanation now, isn't it so obvious? I'm literally describing my needs for safe foods, how I had limited my menu because I couldn't trust the consistency or preparation of food, and I couldn't handle not only the emotional toll of expectations of a meal falling short, but suffering the sensory issue of eating food that I do not like. Sure, I rationalized it all the best that I could under the guise of still being holistic. I concluded that it's not on me for my sensitivities so much as it was on other people for being so subpar at cooking that I had to limit myself so harshly. I am not a picky eater. I am a particular eater. I just have higher standards than what was provided to me. And as much as that is true, still, it is sidestepping the root of the cause. I avoid what I consider to be bad food because I am so negatively affected with sensory challenges and need that consistency. It's a textbook neurodivergent trait to have safe foods, and that's actually what I'm describing in the video. Although I was so focused on explaining why it's not my fault for acting in such a way instead of focusing on why, internally, I created this system to protect myself. It's ironic that things will come up online and I'll have a very telling response, but I couldn't see it that way initially. Like when the whole girl dinner trend was going around, my reaction was validation. Like, hell yeah, let's normalize eating nuggies and smiley face fries if that's what makes people happy as adults. Only to learn that the trend was in some ways enabling people with eating disorders, and on the other end, validating neurodivergent people with safe food needs. Which is good, the latter one, anyway. But ironic that I always instantaneously fall on the autistic response type without realizing it, because that just seems normal to me. To me, it's so obvious now that I have the knowledge about autism that isn't based on one end of the spectrum defined by what people understood as Asperger's, which is now outdated and offensive, that I have been a textbook case in so many ways. I always related to neurodivergent content, but I just chalked it up to the general relatability. That means well but misguided idea that we're all a little autistic. At first, I thought I was gaslighting myself with the possibility I was autistic, manufacturing myself into the narrative. Like, oh, it's just a coincidence. I spent my whole life justifying and rationalizing that I am just introverted and shy, ignoring the severity of it or the internal experience of that. But the more content I was introduced to, the more terms I learned, it's become impossible to deny now. A couple similarities, a couple overlap, sure, but it sounds like an exaggeration, but just about every aspect of my life I've been able to understand better and more accurately through the lens of autism. I didn't have the terms before, but I always have been plagued with rumination. I suffer from inertia. I experience echolalia sometimes. I've been through burnout, undoubtedly. The autistic kind, not just the understandably exhausted kind. I've been high masking by definition since I was a child, which I will explore in another video, among all the other things. And I cannot describe well enough yet how disorienting, existentially fucked it feels to look back and see that I am a multitude of checkboxes. It's so obvious. And it's embarrassing because my special interest is literally finding reason in my lived experiences so I can construct a cohesive narrative. That brings me peace. And at times my life has been turbulent, I've pursued that understanding obsessively. I wrote 4 memoirs as a means to process all the different aspects and nuance of my failed first relationship. Like, that ain't normal. And yet, if I grew up now, would I have been diagnosed as a child, despite the high masking? I was never open enough about my inner machinations until now, and no one back in the 90s knew that any of my experiences were applicable. But I do wonder now, like, would I have been clocked? As an adult now, I worry still, like, even after all of the undeniable, overwhelming applicability, will I be seen as autistic enough?